Hello and welcome to That Millwall podcast. Today we have a Who Are You? We're joined by a brand new guest, Leon. Leon, how are you?
I'm good, mate. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me on.
No, more than welcome. We always say here that it's nice to meet the fans and sometimes hear the stories of people that we never really would get the opportunity to speak to. As always, this is going out on YouTube. It'll go out on all sort of podcast providers, Spotify, Apple Music, things like that. Leon, let's get straight into it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit of a weird supporter in as much that I live in China. So getting to games has been difficult. That said, I'm a South East London boy through and through, fourth generation Millwall fan. I've been going to the Den reputedly since 1964, 61 years of age. Mum's family's from Rotherhithe, from Redriff Road. Dad's family's from Peckham, Camberwell. So both sides of the family, Millwall. Personally, born and bred in Catford. And my dad's family later moved out to Downham. Been overseas for a number of years, but kept my season ticket going. All the time I've been overseas. Been back, come back 3 or 4 times a year. Actually, my wife and kids live in the UK. During COVID, they had to get up and leave China because of what was going on. So I was last back for the Sheffield United game where we won 3-2. So I try and get back as much as I can.
It's interesting. Obviously, you'd pre-told me that you were based out in China, so I knew obviously that was coming. I didn't expect you to say that you kept up your season ticket though. That's quite the commitment. I'm assuming do your family, do your friends use that when you're not available to go to games, or is it just purely just for you as and when you're back in the UK?
I try to let them use it, but with the photo card and all that, it's a little bit difficult. But the family still go. Block 32. And look, over the years I've been overseas, it's really come back to help because, look, for some people, 300 odd quid or whatever is a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. But, if I look back, I've had, playoff finals where I've managed to get tickets, cup finals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's paid off to keep playing the club. And I'm proud to do it. So, I'm happy that I'm still a season ticket holder, even though I don't get to use it that much. But
no, that's the thing. I think, as you say, the success that we've had recently with getting to Wembley, obviously having that ticket and making those plans, it does make things a lot easier, especially if you're looking to. On some of the days, some people like to, sit in a certain spot or have the opportunity to choose where they sit rather than just be left with what's left over. So, it's probably a good thing. You said that obviously both sides of your family are Millwall supporters. I'm guessing you didn't really have much of a choice growing up.
Yeah, I mean, there was a funny time actually. Friend's dad took me to Palace. And that didn't go well when I came home and the old man found out about it. And they were in the same division as us at the time. So it was like there was nothing gained. So I went to Selhurst Park and sat in the Arthur, whatever it is called, stand. But look, honestly, the banter at Millwall, people ask me why I'm a Millwall fan. Honestly, days out there, especially when you live overseas, it's the banter I miss. It's, and over many, many decades, it's just the banter. It's hilarious. You look around you, you see all kinds of people, predominantly working class, which I am. I just love the banter. That's the biggest thing I miss.
I think it's certainly something, isn't it, that's a draw to, and that's why once you find that love of the club, you're drawn to it. You can never really step away from it. It stays with you wherever you go, and as you say, the people, obviously supporters sometimes have get the rough end of the stick with
Yeah,
reputation, but the majority of the people that you come across or you meet through the club are fantastic people. They do anything for anyone, and as you say, that the banter and the kind of wit from Millwall supporters is second to none. It's a very important aspect of a match day. Um, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think you said was your first game, was it in six? Did you say 64?
yeah. So I don't remember it, right? So give you a bit of history here. So back in '64 at the old Den, the ground, the Greyhound track and Speedway track was still open, which adjoined, which is on what you would call Jews Hill. My mum's brother was a Speedway rider for, they were called New Cross Rangers. So Saturdays, and look, I'm going by what I've been told because I can't remember it. I was born in '62, but I'm led to believe I was taken to my first game in '64. And then what my dad would do would, mum and dad would either go and watch the Greyhounds or go and watch the Speedway after the Millwall game because they started straight afterwards.
Yeah.
So at the end of the Ilderton Road end, you could walk through to the old to the old Greyhound Speedway track. My first recollection of the game is actually in '67. And that would have been Charlton at home. And I think we drew 0-0. That's the first time I, recall speaking to my dad about a game. But I'm led to believe I went a couple of years earlier than that, quite a few times.
And what was your, obviously from what you can remember, what was your sort of memories of going to the old Den, going to games, and your impressions of it?
Well, we lived in Catford, so we used to get, my dad didn't drive in those days, so we used to get the 36B to New Cross and cut through the back, up through Monson Road, into the old Coblow Lane. The smell, there was just a distinctive smell. I mean, everyone smoked in those days. My mum's, dad's family were dockers, rough as you like, funny as you like, few pints in the Hatcham Arms or whatever. And then we used to sit by the corner of the CBL, and there was the big floodlight there, and they used to prop me up on the floodlight. Just the whole ambience of the ground. I mean, the toilets didn't have a roof on it, right? So, in winter as a kid, I can remember freezing my nuts off. Stood literally in ankles of what, and just fellas, hard as you like, hard as nails, working as hard as they like, just felt part of it. The smells, the guy coming round selling the monkey nuts. I think they used to call him the Greek or something. Hot cup of Bovril, my dad used to buy me. And you came up the steps and the noise, and then I'd be either sitting on, like say, the floodlight, big concrete floodlight that you'll see in the photos, or I'd be on one of the stanchions, to stop people crowd rushing. And then as I got older, I was allowed to look, kind of walk around a little bit. I think really in the '60s and '70s, I saw the good and bad of Millwall. When I first started going, I saw the very good because we went 57 games unbeaten. And then in '71, we nearly got promoted, of course. So I saw the good and the bad of Millwall. I saw them go through the divisions. But the biggest memory for me, mate, is when I was at school. So I went to Sedge Hill School, which is in Bellingham or Catford. Was everyone supported Man United or Liverpool, Arsenal, whatever? I stood out as being Millwall, and I always remember having to stand my ground. Even in South East London. So fond times, and I look back at them, and I'd say about the smell, I can still smell it. Even the pee, in the open air toilets, it's still there with you.
It's interesting because obviously you have a distinct memory of the old ground, you know, where you used to sit, the smell, the feel, the noise. Comparing it to when we moved to the Den, I don't like to refer to it as the new Den. It was new. It's not new anymore. You know, it's 30 years now. Do you like the ground? Do you have the same sense of recollection of memories of when you first went? What are your thoughts on the ground now?
So when we moved in '93, I know, you know, because I was at the last game, I think Bristol Rovers, and we got tonked, and I remember tearing out a bit of grass. You know, the first time the old man let me run on the ground, even though I was by then I was in my late teens, and that bit of grass is still in Ashford in Kent somewhere. But I actually was so excited about the new Den because well, it's not the new Den now, but the Den now, it was a wow factor for me. So when we played our first game there in a pre-season friendly against Bobby Robson's team from Portugal, I sat in what is now always been the away end. And I remember sitting there with my dad and my uncles, and we'd come up the concourse and all the bars were open. And I was like, wow. And to be fair, it still has that wow factor for me. So I've kind of mentally parked the old Den in my childhood memories. But I loved the Den. I love the Den. It over the years, it's built its own character and characteristics. You know, you still come through that railway arch, which is the same as you used to do at the old Den, depending on which way you came in. So it's got it's still got that community feel. And, you know, I've heard some of your podcasts about filling the corners in and stuff like that. I've got my own views on that, which, you know, if you want to ask me, I'm happy to ask. But I love the Den. I think it's really quite unique. Still an old style football ground in a modern era.
I think it's interesting because I've been asked this question a lot. I've spoken about it a lot. I think if you take away from the Den or add to the Den different things, it would lose what the Den is. I think that maybe one day there will be changes. The changes, as I have said, I would always maybe like the two corners filled in at the home end, not all the way around. But I think, like you said, it's old school. It has the characteristics of an old school football ground. I mentioned in one of mine a little while ago, a Sunderland fan who come to the Den this year. They hadn't been before, and because they're used to that bowl shape at the stadium, like it's all enclosed, they loved it. They absolutely loved it. It was an old school football ground. It was a good game as well. It's sort of an old school game of football, which I think helped. But I think you're right. The Den is what it is, and we make it what it is. And I think you're right in the sense of you still have that buzz and the memories when you go into the ground. It still hits you sometimes, especially in the big games. It still hits you as it did perhaps years gone by. I think sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say I've got a good friend out here who's a Rangers fan, and ironically, I'm led to believe that the same architects that designed the modern Ibrox designed the Den. And if you look at Ibrox, it's 3 tiers. So it's 3 tiers of what we have, but the corners are open. I'm not sure if with Ibrox now all the corners are open, but apparently it was the same architects. And, you know, if someone wants to go online and say you're absolutely wrong, that's fine. But that's what I've been led to believe. And it's just got character. And the character being that, you know, the old ground was Cold Blow Lane. That wind used to blow through, and the wind at the Den still blows through on those nights. You feel it. And, you know, if you lost that, I'm not sure, you know, I think you'd lose some of the ambience. And for me, I still love it. And we've not outgrown it, right? So, you know, I know we've been filling the ground recently, 18,500. If we added, for me, if they're going to do something, make the lower tier of the CBL standing to get the attendances up, that would make sense. But please, don't touch it too much. It's our home, and it feels like home.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot's been made up because there was the renewal, Lewisham Council, a lot of talk about that, and I think there's been a lot of design work gone round and concept art and things, and I think if they're going to, one day there will inevitably be changes. We all know that, but you don't want to change too much from what it is. There's little tweaks that can happen, but I think as long as they don't come too far away from it, then I suspect we'll be okay, and things should remain very similar. I think you touched on your season ticket is in block 32 in the new ground. Has it always been there? Has that always been your? I know you said your first game was in the away end, but have you always had your season ticket there?
No, it was 30. It was 30 at first, I think, for the first couple of seasons, and then we sort of worked our way out as a family to work out that we wanted to be closer to the centre line. So we're slightly to the right of Rowett's dugout. So it kind of just progressed over the first. I'm not sure if it was after the first season. I think personally, it was after the second season, and then those seats have kind of been kept. But all the people around. I don't go there for month after month. Sometimes, during COVID, obviously I couldn't go there at all. But the people are still the same, right? You lose one once in a while, which is really sad. Like my dad's gone now; he's got a plaque in the stadium. But generally the people are the same. And I think you find your own comfort zone. And it's a great view from there. I've sat a couple of times up in the top. I've been in a couple of boxes over the years, and just for me, it just never felt the same. I just think it's comfort zone.
Absolutely. I think people, once you find your spot, it's certainly once you find, as you say, home, you tend to stay there. I mean, I'm in block 10, right behind the goal, in line with the penalty spot, and I've been up there for 12 years, 13 years. We were below, but once you find it, and as you say, the people, they get a little bit older. Each year, the faces get a little bit older, or like myself, sometimes a little bit of grey hair comes through. But the people stay the same, as you say. You recognise people, and you don't always know their name, but you know the sort of nod at them, you're right, or how you doing, sort of thing. And as you say, that never ever changes. Coming away from the ground, moving towards players and managers now. We'll start from sort of in the past. You've obviously been following the club for quite a long time, so you've built up quite a few players that you've perhaps seen over the years. If I could press you down for your favourite player of all time, and due to the fact that you possibly have maybe a few that it's hard to choose from, a couple of honourable mentions if you choose.
Yeah, this was a really tough one, and I watched last week's podcast, and a guy that was probably just a couple of years older than me. So we obviously watched the same sort of era of football. He mentioned Keith Weller. Has to have a mention. Sad for you that you never saw him to grace those blades of grass, but Keith Weller was outstanding. Something we could use with today for sure. Derek Possey was mentioned last week, I think, as well. But I look at that team in 71. It was an all-round team. Couple of superstars, as I've just mentioned. So I know this guy. I've met this guy a few times. For me, the most intelligent player we've ever had. Probably, gets a lot of crap, as was mentioned. It's got to be Teddy. Just for the fact that he went out on loan, he was discarded by a couple of managers. I believe he was out on loan in Sweden for a time. We took him back from Aldershot, of all places, and he was always deemed to be too slow. That tie up with Cascarino, you could just see this guy's brain works like a snooker player. He was thinking 3-4 balls ahead every time. So Teddy would get it. There's so many more I can mention. I mean, as a kid, Barry Kitchener, look, there's 2 players, right, that have stands named after them. And that's for a reason. Harry Cripps has a bar, the Kitchener stand. As a kid, I got to meet both of them. They were both gentle giants off the field, just gladiators on it. Kitchener could have gone on. I know there was, it's pretty true from what I believe that Manchester United wanted to sign him. He was a one-club man. It's so difficult to pick. But you've put me on the spot. I'm going to go with Teddy.
I think there's a lot of fans. I mean, I go on what my dad said, and Teddy is Teddy. He was similar to what you said there about him being ahead of 3 or 4 sort of passes ahead of what everybody else was. That's how everybody describes Teddy, and for someone, if everybody can see that, I think everybody knew how good of a player he was. Obviously, I never got to see him in a Millwall shirt. I saw him later on in his career, at other clubs perhaps, but everywhere he went, most places think he's held in quite high regard, and I think that says a lot about how good he was.
Yeah, look, he had no pace, right? So that's why the brain came in. So, Cass would take a long ball. We have always been pretty much known as, a long ball team, but Cass would take the ball. Sheringham would just read the pass and no pace. I mean, 0 pace. So I watched him for England. I happened to go to Japan and watch England beat Argentina in Japan. He had a brilliant game against Argentina. I happened to watch him play for Spurs a couple of times and United once. The guy had a brain, a real brain, something unfortunately we probably don't have today. So that brain made up for the speed. That's where I'm going with this. And you've probably heard that umpteen times.
No, the thing is, I think for a club like ours, there's always going to be your top tier players. Your Sheringhams, your Kitcheners, your Cripps. Later, sort of more recent times, your Neil Harrises. They're people that everybody can relate to in some kind of way or have memories of. And I think it's very difficult. And Teddy was the record goal scorer for such a long time. He was part of a successful team. As much as people might give the same answers, people still say things that you've never heard before. But there's always that. It always comes back to the brain and the ability. Sometimes there's a lot made about pace and there's a lot made about power. But sometimes if you've got it up here, you're ahead of people already before you walk out onto the pitch.
He was a footballing snooker player. He just knew how to read the ball, how to read being marked, how to make himself that 1 yard of space that he didn't have in pace. And his finishing, his touch, whether it's with the foot or with the head, incredible. I don't think that we'll see a player like him ever again because those players don't exist. The game's become. I keep arguing with people. The game's become more about athletes and the football comes secondary. And that's one of the problems I have with some of the team that we have today is that physically, as athletes, they're great athletes. But in terms of football skills and brain and knowledge, when to slow it down, when to fast it up, when to take a breather, when to push on, when to pull back. Some of those things for me in the modern game are lacking. Teddy could do all that. He could read a game. He could know when to burn himself out and when he could take a breather. And I don't know, just a very, very intelligent football player.
And moving on to manager, obviously, again, probably seen a fair few and had some good times, as you say, back in the early part of supporting the club and more recently as well. Who would you say is your favourite manager?
Ooh, yeah, and this one killed me. So look, we got promoted in '87. John Doherty took all of the plaudits for that, and quite rightly so. But I've got to go back 3 years before that, when we needed to win 13 games away. 13 games to stay up. We ended up winning at Chesterfield last game of the season. I was there. George Graham came into that club. We were on our feet. We'd had George Pepe as manager, George Pecci, and then Peter Anderson. And the club was in total mess. Graham came in. One of the first things he did was, he's a Scotsman. He was regimented. He'd had a high career at Arsenal, hard as nails. First thing he did was he asked, I believe it was Purcell as the chairman, he said, these guys have got to start wearing blazers and slacks. They've got to wear the crest on their blazers. I don't want any of this turning up in tracksuits for game days. He just changed the whole mentality.
Yeah.
He then got us, he saved us from going down. And then the next season he started signing. And he brought in players that were key to the '87 promotion, in my view, in my humble opinion. He set the bedrock. John Doherty executed it. So he brought in players like Briley, we had Fashanu at the time, and a few others. Sorry, I'm being long-winded about my answer, right. But I really want to give George Graham some kudos to what happened later. But, if you look on paper, you have to say John Doherty. Then going forward, you look at the likes of Kenny J and Neil. They both took the club over when it was on its knees again and turned it around. But on paper, like any Millwall fan, because of what we did in the space of 2 years, has got to be John D.
And the next couple, I always find these interesting because it's very difficult to. I mean, myself, anyone that puts on a Millwall shirt, you want them to do well. Sometimes that it's not going to happen. You can just see it a mile off, but you're willing them to do well. We've had a few, shall we say, shockers over the years, and we've also come up against some bad players, or have had bad performances against us. So over the years, who would you categorise as probably one of the worst players that you've seen play for the club, and perhaps worst player you've seen play at the Den? Now, that answer can be the same. It doesn't have to be different, but there's been a couple of away or rival clubs who have had some terrible players as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, for me, I mean, there's the obvious, right? And it's been mentioned because you asked this question quite a lot, but Taylor Fletcher was up there. Pat Cuff comes out as well, which was pretty woeful as a goalkeeper. I mean, if you've ever seen someone put a ball in his own net as much, and Long didn't do himself any favours yesterday, in my view. Akim Fenwa, when we signed Akim Fenwa, I was down the Den and he ran out and I was like, that can't be a football player. It's got to be one of the stewards who's decided to put a kit on. I mean, look, to be fair to Akim Fenwa, right, he's had a glorious career at Wickham. He just didn't look like a footballer to me, and he actually didn't do us any favours. It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. I've seen a lot of players in away sides bottle it at the Den. One of them actually was Ian Holloway. I remember when he was playing for QPR and he came down the Den and he went to take a throw on, and someone was tugging at his shirt, the old Den, and he just didn't know what to do. No, I wouldn't like to say. As a Millwall player, I was never fond of Nicky Coleman back in the day. Perhaps that's a little bit unfair, but Pat Cuff, Millwall, definitely.
And moving it on to now some memories again of games, moments. Very, very tricky, I would imagine, not seeing as that you've seen them in the top flight, cup finals, Europe, there's been a lot of games. What would you say is possibly your most memorable match that involves Millwall?
I have two. Well, I actually have more than that, but two I'm going to mention. Bournemouth away, April. We had 2 games left. We were top of the league. We went away to Bournemouth. I was there. Kevin O'Callaghan scored a penalty. Then Herlock scored a worldie, an absolute worldie. Bournemouth pulled one back. And then Brian Hall saved a penalty. And then we went away to Hull, I think 2 weeks later, and secured the championship. So Bournemouth away was just one hell of a night. I mean, I remember finishing work at like 12 o'clock, driving down the M3, and it was just a party. It was an absolute party. And the performance, it had everything about it that yesterday should have had about it. We had to win. We had to go there, and every player had to turn up, and they did. That's the difference.
For the benefit of when this goes out, we're recording this just after the defeat at Wigan. Damning defeat at Wigan, and obviously what Leon's referring to is that the players perhaps didn't show enough desire, or didn't show any desire really to want to get themselves into the top 6. But obviously at that game years gone by, perhaps they could have been watching videos or old clips of that, because as you said, they all stood up and were counted for there.
Unbelievable that night. Unbelievable. It was a midweek game. We got one end. It was an open end. You can look it up on YouTube. Herlock's goal, unbelievable for Herlock, who I love as a man and a player. Just everyone turned up on the night, and then Horney to save a penalty to stop it going 2-2 with 2 minutes to go. It's up there.
And what was your second? What was your other game?
Hull City away when we won it. So yeah.
So obviously, following on from winning the promotion at Hull, I'm assuming would that be perhaps your favourite ever Millwall moment? Is that the one?
I think it has to be. I mean, it was just an amazing feeling. I mean, we went up there mob-handed. I mean, it was thousands upon thousands of people driving up there. It wasn't the greatest of games, and we won with an O'Callaghan penalty, but even the Hull fans were clapping, the Millwall fans. It was such an achievement. But then driving back from Hull across the Humber Bridge, I had a company car back in those days, a Ford Orion, and we had some roof, like one of those plastic things that folds back. I remember my dad, who's no longer with us, God rest his soul, and my uncle sitting out of the sunroof, and every car going across the Humber Bridge had a blue and white scarf all the way down the A1. It was just, and then we got back. Not sure what time we got back, maybe 9 o'clock, and we headed to. My dad used to drink in a working men's club in Bromley, and we ramped up there, and everyone in there was Millwall pretty much, and it was humongous, brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
And I guess it's one of those things, isn't it? Because it's the only time that's ever happened. For those fortunate enough like yourself to be able to experience those kind of things, people like myself, when I hear people talk about it, it's nice to hear those memories, as you say, you know, the cars with the scarves and things like that, because we've not seen that again. And the fact that you were able to live it it's obviously something, and you'll never lose that. That will stay with you until forever, which is a nice thing to have.
It was a lovely thing for a generational perspective, because my granddad was still alive then, you know, my dad, obviously, me, and my son. So my son was only a couple of years old then. So it spanned those 4 generations. And, you know, my son, Daniel, he doesn't remember any of it, but I can certainly remember throwing him up and down in the air a few times.
But he was there. He was there.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't there because he was too young. But you know, it's like it spanned that 4 generations. Sadly, 2 of those are no longer with us. But it was just looking at the faces of people who you'd stood with on a Wednesday night, cold, wet. You know, sometimes 2,000 people down the den. You know, getting hammered. You know. It was all of that just in one big crescendo of happiness. I felt it a little bit when we got to the AWS final, the auto windscreens, when we just absolutely packed Wembley. But, you know, sadly, we got done by that same team. But no, I don't think anything can take that 3 or 4 weeks, that Bournemouth, that whole game, away from any of us that are of a certain age.
And I mean, obviously, you've probably come across and had lots of stories following the club. You've told that there of Hull and Bournemouth. Are those amongst your best? Is there another perhaps story that tops those?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, you know, obviously, you know, the playoff finals that we won and lost, Morrison, I mean, absolutely epic. You know, because I think Neil worked and the club worked very hard, and I think they continue to work hard to turn the club around. But, you know, just the odd night or the odd game down the den, there's been some great times, and people shouldn't ignore those. I mean, it's been some horrid times as well, of course, right? But that's what we do with Millwall fans, right? We have to roughen the smooth of it all. You know, when it's low, it's low. When it's high, it's high. There's so many. I don't want to bore your listeners with it, but I think it was David that was on last week, a week or 2 ago. And I said he's like a similar age, a little bit older than me. But, you know, I remember that Sheffield Wednesday game when we were 2-0 down at half time, and the fans were, you know, the supporters were on the backs of the players. They were absolutely crap that day. And then we came out and won 4-2. That's what it's about, supporting Millwall.
Absolutely. I think it's important, and I think this is where sometimes, as you say, the different in perhaps people coming to the den, not your old school or your regulars, but the newer generation or newer people that are coming to the ground don't understand that we're not Man United, Man City. We're not going to win every single game, and it's not going to be great at times, but there will be moments in time that you'll be on top of the world. There's no better feeling, but you also have to accept that there's times where it's pretty depressing, and you just have to kind of roll with it until things improve.
It's got to be one of the most uniquest football clubs in the world. I mean, you know, living overseas, you know, everything out here has got to be Premiership or whatever. So when you have those conversations with people, and they go, "Oh, who do you support?" You know what I'm going to say. So you get over that barrier, and they go, "Why do you support Millwall?" Well, they're my local club, right? And my mum and dad and my grandfathers, and that's where I lose football these days. You know, obviously my Chinese friends where I live, they only see one thing, right? They see the Premiership, so they go and buy the shirt, blah blah blah, and to me, they're fans. They're fans, right? They watch it on TV. For me, I'm a supporter, and I think there's a distinct difference between those two.
And I mean, obviously, I'm going to ask a question and then lead on to another one, if I may. Being in China, obviously, the Premier League, as you said, it is king. Everybody, I would assume, can buy a Man United shirt or a Manchester City shirt. I would imagine at the moment, as they tend to be the successful teams. What's the outside of the typical reputation that the club has? Are Millwall known in China? What's the thought and feeling of people around that you speak to?
It's funny actually you say that, because back in 2004 when we got in the cup final, suddenly I noticed a few Millwall shirts knocking around in Hong Kong, and it's so typical, right? That's the way it works with the press. Are they known? Yeah, I think most people know them. Obviously, I don't support them, but they're known. It's funny you should say any of this, because one of my best mates is a Chinese lad, and he's from New Elton, and his mum and dad have got a couple of takeaways that's quite famous in New Elton, and his nickname's Kato.
Right.
You remember the Pink Panther films? And he's Millwall through and through. So, he gives it the, all right. And he's a little Chinese lad, which is quite funny. So there's him, and then I've got two other mates in Hong Kong that I know that are from sort of New Cross, Rotherhithe sort of area, who are Millwall, but they're not Millwall, if you know what I mean. They're not up every, like I was Saturday night, Millwall TV, midnight. I get up at 3 a.m. to watch it every week, midweek games. They're not that, but yeah, there's a couple of us knocking about.
Flying the flag on the other side of the world is always a nice feeling. It's sometimes, as you know, and I'm sure our listeners know, a topic of conversation that especially that tends to come up with fellas is, do you like football? Who do you support? It's just an easy conversation to have, and you say Millwall, and you're always met with the take a step back or the stupid comments that usually come around. But when you're abroad, sometimes it's nice to see that the flag's being waved on the other side of the world, and I'm sure, as I say, it's not, and you're not alone. I think it's nice that there's at least somebody or other people around you that have an interest in the club or support the club, because obviously if that wasn't the case and it's just yourself, you've got no one to have a rant with or no one to perhaps even maybe, did they travel with you back to the UK at all, any of them?
Yeah. So my mate Kato came back for the sorry, my little friend. He came back for a couple of the playoff finals, which was quite funny. And like I say, his family's quite well known in the Chinese takeaway industry in New Elton. So, and bless him, he's like, yeah, I'm there. You can get a ticket, I'll be there. And he's a bit of a shirter, being a foreign football fan. I'm not a shirter, by the way. But he was, he was all kitted out, bless.
And obviously, in terms of the dynamic of being abroad, I know obviously we spoke in the week, you'd obviously were waking up early to watch the Birmingham fixture and catching the games on Lions TV. When maybe from years gone by, following the club away from home, obviously you can't really do that perhaps nowadays. Any particular away days that stand out? Any particular favourites?
I've got favourites and I've got unfavourites. The unfavourite would be many years ago. I can't remember the year. It would have been in the 70s, but we piled into the back of a mate's car. We were playing Carlisle away. I think we got as far as the Lake District and found out via the radio that the game had been postponed. That was pretty. That was pretty like, right. So what did we do as Millwall fans? We drove back down and we went to Preston, who were playing. I can't remember who they were playing, but there's a bunch of us turned up as Millwall fans and watched the Preston game. But let them know we were there, if you know what I mean. A few Millwall chants going out. Best away days. Too many. I mean, you know, it depends. It depends. I had a few mates that were Coventry fans years ago when they were at Highfield Road, and they always looked after us. We went up there. We'd always go up on a Friday night, stay the night, go out, have a few beers in Cov, and then go to the game the next day. So thoroughly enjoyed that. You know, I always enjoyed, for some reason, going to Forest. Just a beautiful ground. You know, just smelt of football back in the day. The old baseball ground, Derby. Out the newer grounds I've been to, Emirates is pretty impressive. I've not been to Spurs' new ground, unfortunately. But then when Millwall were in top flight, I don't think I missed an away game. Anfield was pretty spectacular, and we probably should have won that day. Paul Stevens scored. You know, we gave it a real good go at Anfield in the first season. Yeah, just and different grounds for different reasons. You know, I had a bunch of mates that we used to. We also always try and sort of get away early in the morning, find a little pub somewhere in the country, a couple of pints when you could, and then drive that extra 20, 30 miles for the game. You know, I remember going once to Swindon and pulling up somewhere in Wiltshire and found this little country pub, a couple of beers near Newbury, a few beers, or maybe more than a few. And then, you know, on to the game. They were just, that's what Saturdays was all about, you know.
And it's also, when you say that, sometimes with the away games, it's the memories that you have with the people that you go with, friends, family. Yeah. You always, and I don't know about yourself, but with me, I remember when we went to Swindon, do you remember when we went to Northampton, and you remember those stories for different reasons. There's always something that happens along the way. Before I come on to the current squad and the current situation with the club at the moment, I'm going to just quickly touch on a couple of opponents. Obviously, over the years, there's been, should we say, top tier rivalries, mid tier rivalries, and teams that like think they're a rivalry with us, but they're really not. Your sort of opponents over the years, the three rivals that you either really enjoy playing or don't look forward to, or someone that you just don't particularly like.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to break any barriers here. West Ham, hate them. Palace, I've got a real dislike for Palace. And that's because I was born in Catford, which, you know, brought up around Catford. You got Sydenham, Forest Hill. You're going into Palace territory there. Actually, my mum lives in Beckenham. Bless her, she's 83. That's real Palace sort of ground, but a load of Millwall players live there. So Palace. The other one, I get it with Leeds. I do get it. I understand it. Been there, both home and away, a number of times. I kind of laugh at Leeds, to be honest. I've always thought them to be people that just believe they're something that they're not. Teams that have always turned us over, though. Teams like yesterday, Wigan, Barnsley, Bradford, just always, for some reason, have it on us in terms of results, you know. Some of those clubs just irk me because I just know. When Chaps was talking the other night, and he talks very, very sensibly, by the way, and please pass him my best regards. You know, Wigan, just a banana skin for us. Don't know what it is about the ground, about the DW Stadium. I don't know what it is about the club, because, you know, they're a tiny club. They just have one on us every time. You know, they've upset me a few times.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that. Obviously, that you touched on it earlier. The auto windscreen shield final. I mean, I was there. I was 7 at the time of going, and that was my first experience of, I think, a genuine heartbreak at a football game, going to see your team at the National Stadium and as a kid, and just the feeling of when they scored, and it was just sort of like, oh, that's not what was supposed to happen. We were supposed to win, and Wigan have always been a funny club like that. I mean, they beat us at Wembley in the semi-final of the FA Cup as well. They are a club. There are Barnsley. You touched on as another one, as you say. There's just teams that the fixture comes around and you just think, don't fancy this, especially away from home. You don't fancy it, and as we said yesterday, was another one to the list of Wigan woes. Touching on the fact that the current squad and the current situation, at the moment, as I say, at the time of recording, the Lions are currently in 6th spot, but it's not really in our hands. Firstly, in the current team, who would you say is our best player, and who would you say is your favourite player?
Best player is a tough one because, do you know, I think one of the problems with our team is we're a utility team, and I think we've been that for a number of seasons. I think we run such a small squad that we tend to sign players that can play more than one position. And I think when it comes to the top end of the division, that's been our downfall. I'll give you an example that, when you sign a centre forward, you should be signing a centre forward, not someone that can play left or right or drop to a 10. We want a centre forward. So for me, we're a utility team. I think we work exceptionally hard. I think we, on our day, we're so resilient, or we have been. The squad in depth, though, just doesn't have the quality for me. Obvious choice for everybody is going to be Zian Fleming, but for me, I think that, I think he goes missing a lot in games. Out of all the players in the team at the moment, I think the guy, he won't get player of the season, but the guy for me that's worked harder than anybody is Tom Bradshaw. And I'm shocked that Rowett took him off yesterday. I'm absolutely shocked.
I think Tom Bradshaw, funny enough, going way off subject here, I met a mate of mine who was in a pub with his dad outside the ground, and I met him up there, and they were talking to Tom Bradshaw's parents. They were there yesterday. They were in this pub, and they speak very highly of the club. They speak very highly of Bradshaw's feelings of the club and London, because he's obviously not from the area. He's very settled, and I think Tom gets a very rough end of the stick from his manager and the coaching setup, because he's asked to do a job that he shouldn't be asked to do, essentially. And I think you're right. I don't think he'll win Player of the Season, but if Player of the Season was done on work rate, Tom Bradshaw would walk away with that trophy hands down, because his commitment and his effort to what he's asked to do is second to none. Absolutely second to none. And you can tell that his parent, they weren't lying. You can tell, as much as he probably doesn't want to do the job sometimes, he's basically a battering ram for 3 centre-backs or 2 centre-backs, because he's asked to chase down long or flick on long balls, but he does it, and he's always got a smile on his face. And I think he is someone that's very, very underrated or undervalued in the squad, because he's the striker. You expect him to score goals, but his work rate I think he got the assist yesterday for the goal as well. Little things like that go unnoticed. Obviously,
just on that, yeah. I think the guy's given everything, right? And you always hear of old Millwall supporters, and I'm one of them now. As long as they try, we'll always love them. Well, in this case, in this season, for me, that boy has given everything. I mean, I doubt he's got a lot left to give. And for me, you asked me who stood out. Most people will go for Zian Fleming. I'm guessing some will go for Cresswell. I think Cresswell turned it around nicely. George Saville, I think, has come into his own more recently. Billy Mitchell obviously deserves a mention. But, when I look back at the season, which we're about to do in a couple of games, and I think about who went out there, who left nothing on the pitch, it's Bradshaw.
Absolutely. And obviously, as it stands, I think West Brom and Sunderland have just kicked off. If there's a winner in that game, we'll find ourselves outside of the top 6 for the first time in quite a while. Obviously, if it's a draw, then we remain in on goal difference, I think. Do you think the top 6 has now gone? Is it now, after yesterday's result, was that the kind of hammer blow, or is there still hope for us?
Heart says there's hope, because it's such a messed up division. I mean, I'm going to hark back on history a little bit here. There are certain seasons where teams like Millwall have a chance, and this was one. For whatever reason, right? I think when we look back, and we will look back, and it might be success, it might not, but I think when we look back, the January transfer window for me was a nightmare and a disaster. I think we went about it all the wrong way. I know the story personally about Phobie. Anyone that thinks that we should have kept Phobie, they're having a laugh. He's got injury issues. The best thing that he could have done personally for himself was take a tax-free football deal in Dubai. And by the way, from what I'm reading, he's played one game, scored one goal. So, anyone that says why is a Phobie still not here, the Nisbet thing, again, there's stories behind that. But look, January transfer window, we should have done better. We should have been prepared. We were where we were. We knew what we needed. Like I say, it goes back to what I'm saying about Bradshaw. He's been carrying this team as a lone striker, which he's not. He's not a hit man. He's a box in the fox type player. And that for me is, I think, will be our downfall.
I think a lot's going to be made come the end of the season. As you say, if we do make the top 6, great. Then we'll all be very happy with that. But if we don't, I think there's certainly there'll be a lot of questions asked of the club row and the recruitment side of things. I think
it will be Cobham West Brom personally.
Now, yes, I think it's easy to say that when you look at the table, but I think West Brom, with the games in hand now and on, I think on Tuesday they play, or Wednesday, have got as good a chance as any. They've hit form at the right time, and Coventry have the goal scorer in Guy Carrez, and that's what you need at this level. At this stage of the season, you need someone who's going to put the ball in the back of the net, and they have it. So it would be very brave to bet against. Just coming to, obviously, towards the end, a couple of sort of quirky questions that we like to ask. Firstly, is there anything, if at all, that you would like to change about the club, past, present, or future? Obviously, the future is a bit of an interesting one because you don't know, but something that you would like to not happen.
Yeah, I'll leave the history as it is, right? History is history. We are what we are. We've come through, those 100, what is it now, nearly 130 years. Why try and change it, right? You can't change it. So going forward as a club, I'm looking forward to the new training ground. I think that's going to be, I think one of our bad points is, I know for a few people, a few guys that have nearly signed for us. I'm not trying to be Big Charlie here, but one of the big turn-offs has been the training facilities down at Calman. I think the training ground is going to change the academy. Even though the academy at the moment, under 23s, is doing exceptionally well. I think new training facilities will maybe attract better style of player, maybe from the continent. I'd like to see a few more continental players. I don't think it's a bad thing. But I'd like to go back to a point I made earlier. I'd like to see us start signing a few players that are known purely for playing one position and not these utility players. You know, look at players like Styles. Oh, he can play right back. Oh, he can play centre midfield. Oh, he can play right wing. Oh, Shackleton, midfield. Oh, right back. I think as a club, we've got to get bigger than that. We've got to bring players in that are out and out centre forwards. Crowd might think they're lazy, but that's what they do. They score goals. You know, I think back not too many years ago to players like Darius Henderson, just a beast of a man, right? Lazy, right? But when that ball got to him, the right ball, he put it in the net, right? And I'd like to see us get away from having this, not so much a small squad, but high, you know, my point here, had we had Jed was a single player, and we now have Fleming as a single player. And we're too reliant on those one or two single players that we have within the team. I'd like to see us have more of those, and I'd like them to step up.
It's interesting. I think you might have listened to me speak before, because I absolutely hate the words utility footballer. It's one of my bugbears. It's something that drives me absolutely insane when we sign a player and the first thing that the manager comes out and says, well, he can play in a variety of different positions. And it's like, right, fantastic. So jack of all trades, master of none, basically.
Harris did it. Harris did it. Kenny Jackett did it. Rowett's doing it, right? So I don't think it's the manager. I think it's the budget. We can have 23 professionals, so have at least 19 of them that can play multiple positions. You know, I think this year's dynamic with Jed maybe playing as his true position, which is out wide, Fleming playing a 10, and then you got Bradshaw, who's a say a fox in a box. That would have been an interesting dynamic this year. And look, it's easy to say that, but I do think we would have been a better team.
I think you only have to look at the fact that Jed Wallace is still producing numbers elsewhere. You put him with Fleming and Bradshaw. Look, you know, nothing's a certainty in football, but I tell you, I think we would have been comfortably in the top 6 if you had those three as a sort of a front three. But that's unfortunately it is what it is. We have to move on. Couple of bits here. So your favourite all-time shirt. I know you said you wasn't perhaps a shirter yourself, but any of the kits that the players sort of or over the years that were worn that stick with you?
Yeah, I like the back in the day it was the royal blue Sports shirt, which I think back in the day probably I can't remember what the sponsors were, but I liked it just the royal blue. I do like the Dundee blue. I also like the white kit back in the day. We had a bit of a distinction wearing that, but I would like us. It's the 30th anniversary this year, right?
Yes, of the Den, yeah.
Of the Den. I would like us to do something, maybe back away from the Dundee blue. But like I said earlier, I'm not really been a shirter.
And in terms of finally, I think you touched on earlier that you took some grass from the old Den on the last day. Any other sort of memorabilia that you have? Is there anything that you've got that sticks with you, or would it be that sort of famous grass from the old place?
So I'll tell you a funny story. So when we won the old second division and got promoted, I had a signed shirt that my wife washed, so all the autographs run. So it kind of says now. So that's a funny moment. But yeah. And the other funny thing was when I moved out here to Asia, my wife, bless her, she's from the north of England. Yeah, pretty much every Christmas I got a Millwall shirt. And I say I'm not a shirter, but I never wore them to games. but I always had one. And so I had quite a collection. And I'd been away on a business trip. And you got to remember, we're out here, right, in China, and we live in a gated community. And my wife had been on to me about, how many Millwall shirts I had, even though she bought them. Can you tidy up the wardrobe? And I've been away on a business trip, and I came back, and the guy on the gate, this little Chinese guy, who doesn't speak a word of English, I pull in the car, driving the car. I kind of look at him like that, and he's got London Borough Lewisham on his shirt. And then, like a day later, I pull out, and he's got LDDC. My wife had thrown all my Millwall shirts out to the dustman. And this old guy, Chinese guy, no teeth, I picked all my shirts out in the bin. So I had the frustration for about 20 days of driving out every morning, coming back every night, watching this guy wearing Millwall. So I used to come through the gate, go, Millwall. And he had like no clue what I was on about, right? He just saw it as a cheap bit of clothing.
Free food, free clothing, sorry.
Yeah, and I didn't have the heart. I didn't have the heart to tell him those are my shirts. So
no. So I mean, obviously, in terms of nowadays, do you sort of buy a shirt to have with you back to take over to China, or any other sort of other, maybe not the shirt or a training top or a hoodie or anything like that?
Yeah, my daughters, who are in their early 20s now. So my family are back in the UK. I'm here on my own now at the moment because of the COVID situation. Actually, I've just been back. I was back for Easter. Unfortunately, I couldn't go to the West Brom game because, excuse me, it was sold out. So my wife and kids are down in Devon. One of my daughters is in Leeds at uni. But yeah, the girls have started buying me a shirt. So I've got the latest shirt. I've got last year's shirt and last year's training shirt. So yeah, I've got a couple.
As I said earlier, flying the flag still on the other side of the world, and I'm sure that will continue for many, many years. Leon, it's been fascinating listening to someone who's so passionate about the club, but is, as I say, on the other side of the world. It's been great to have you on. Thanks for giving up your time. Obviously with the time zone as well, it's we had obviously pre-planned to do this, but very much appreciative, and I speak on behalf of other Millwall fans that it's nice to hear that the commitment to get up at strange times in the morning to continue to support the club, and also to continue your season ticket. So any final words for the show?
Yeah, look, keep up the good work, guys. It's a breath of fresh air, that Millwall podcast. I'm not trying to blow smoke here, but I love listening to you guys. I love listening to you chaps, intelligent, younger generation from myself. It's really refreshing. And for someone living the other side of the world who is passionate about Millwall, it's my lifeline, right? The club only put out so much. So love listening to the podcast. Keep up the good work. I will continue to tune in. And this has been good fun. And come on, Millwall. Come on the wall.
No, as I say, it's been a pleasure to record with you. That's the end of this Who Are You with Leon. As always, this will go out on YouTube. It will also be on all other podcast providers. And if you'd like to get involved, as did Leon, reached out to the podcast and said that he'd be interested in doing it. So if you'd like to come on, you can be interviewed by me or any of the panel. We're more than happy to do it. That's been this Millwall podcast. Who Are You with Leon? Thank you very much for your time, guys.